They did not invade us. They did not bomb our cities. They did not need to. Because when the Council of 12 first looked upon Earth, they did something far worse. They judged us. And in the cold vacuum of interstellar politics, judgment was more lethal than war. For centuries, humanity believed we were alone. We launched satellites. We split atoms. We touched the moon and sent fragile machines crawling across Mars. We built telescopes that pierced deep time and saw galaxies forming billions of years before Earth was born. And still, we heard nothing until the signal came. It arrived not as chaos, not as noise, but as a correction, a lattice of encoded mathematics, folding through radio frequencies with impossible precision. It bypassed every encryption system. It entered global networks without resistance. It translated itself into every language simultaneously. It did not greet us. It did not threaten us. It simply stated, species designation human, developmental index 0.47, probability of self-annihilation 83%, long-term viability, negligible. Then came the declaration that would redefine humanity's destiny. The message repeated once, then silence. Panic would have been understandable. War hysteria would have been predictable. Instead, something unexpected happened. Humanity listened. Governments scrambled. Militaries mobilized. Satellites pivoted. The global scientific community tore into the signal like starving wolves. And they discovered something terrifying. The signal did not originate from nearby space. It came from beyond the galactic core, from the direction of the Perseus arm, from a region no human probe had ever approached. We were not being scouted. We were being evaluated. 3 weeks later, they arrived, not with fleets, with observers. 12 colossal structures appeared in high orbit, evenly spaced across the globe. Each was the size of a small moon. Each emitted gravitational harmonics that subtly altered tidal patterns without destabilizing Earth. They did not fire. They did not move aggressively. They simply watched. Global broadcasts activated simultaneously. A being appeared on every screen on Earth. Tall, elongated, translucent skin like refracted glass. 4 luminous eyes arranged vertically. No visible mouth. Yet its voice vibrated inside the skull rather than the ear. It identified itself as a representative of the interstellar harmonium. It explained, without arrogance, without malice, that Earth had been monitored for 12,000 of our years. Human civilization, it stated, demonstrated chronic internal conflict, resource mismanagement, ecological instability, primitive propulsion systems, inefficient energy utilization, tribal governance structures. The verdict was final. Earth would not be invaded. Earth would not be enslaved. Earth would simply be quarantined. We were too unstable to join galactic civilization, too volatile to uplift, too primitive to matter. Across Earth, rage ignited. Not fear, rage. They had not called us dangerous. They had called us hopeless. And humanity has always responded poorly to being told what it cannot become. The harmonium observers remained for 11 months. They recorded wars. They recorded protests. They recorded natural disasters. They recorded political division. Every failure reinforced their model. Probability of self-annihilation increased to 87%. Their conclusion tightened. Earth would collapse within 3 centuries without intervention, and intervention was deemed wasteful. On the final broadcast, the representative delivered the closing statement. Humanity lacks cohesion, technological maturity, and psychological unity required for sustained interstellar presence. You will not reach the stars. The observers then began to withdraw. That was their mistake, because they believed evolution was linear. They believed potential was measurable. They believed civilizations advanced along predictable curves. They did not understand humanity. The day after the harmonium left orbit, something historic occurred. For the first time in recorded history, every major nation signed a single accord within 48 hours. It was not peace, it was defiance. The document became known as the Stellar Mandate. Its core declaration was simple. If we are hopeless, we will redefine hope. If we are primitive, we will redefine primitive. And if we are unworthy of the stars, we will command them. Funding for space research increased by 900%. Private corporations were nationalized into a unified planetary development authority. Military budgets were redirected toward propulsion physics. Nuclear fusion research received unlimited authorization. Artificial intelligence restrictions were loosened under global oversight. The message was clear. We were not racing aliens. We were racing extinction. Within 5 years, fusion reactors achieved stable output. Within 8, orbital shipyards were constructed using autonomous fabrication drones. Within 12, humanity launched its first true interplanetary fleet, not exploration vessels, but infrastructure carriers. Mars was not colonized. It was industrialized. The asteroid belt became humanity's resource reservoir. Solar energy harvesting arrays spanned millions of kilometers in orbit around the Sun. Climate instability was reversed using orbital reflectors and carbon sequestration swarms. For the first time in history, humanity acted as a species instead of nations. Conflict did not vanish, but survival became priority, and something extraordinary happened. The probability of self-annihilation began 8%, 63%, 40%. Models shifted not in alien databanks, but in human projections. We were changing faster than anyone predicted. 17 years after the declaration, humanity achieved something the Harmonium declared impossible. The Alcubierre prototypes, once theoretical curiosities, demonstrated measurable space-time compression in laboratory conditions. Warp metrics stabilized for 0.004 seconds. It was enough to prove we were not bound to chemical rockets, not bound to slow generational drift, not bound to their assumptions. But the true turning point was psychological. Children born after the verdict of extinction grew up with a singular narrative. The galaxy thinks we are hopeless. That sentence did not create despair. It created unity. Human culture transformed. Art shifted toward cosmic themes. Education emphasized astrophysics and engineering. Global identity began superseding national identity. The insult became fuel, and fuel in human hands has always been dangerous. 23 years after the observers departed, the first warp-capable vessel ignited its drive beyond Pluto. The ship was named Defiance. It did not explode. It did not disintegrate. It vanished from conventional space and reappeared 4.2 light-years away. Humanity had crossed interstellar distance in under 3 weeks subjective time. The impossible had become operational. The Harmonium noticed. Their long-range monitoring arrays detected gravitational anomalies inconsistent with Earth's projected trajectory. Probability matrices recalculated. Deviation flagged. Observation drones were dispatched. What they found was not a collapsing civilization. It was an awakening one. Humanity had not fractured under judgment. It had crystallized. And when pressure forms crystals, they do not shatter. They sharpen. By year 30, Earth commanded. Warp-capable fleets fusion, sustained megastructures, autonomous asteroid foundries AI, managed ecological stabilization systems, interstellar communication relays. We were no longer primitive. We were accelerating. And acceleration, once exponential, is impossible to contain. The first Harmonium probe returned visual confirmation. Human vessels patrolling beyond the heliopause. Terraforming operations beginning on exoplanets. Experimental Dyson swarm construction initiated. The Council of 12 convened emergency deliberation because their model had failed. And in galactic civilization, predictive failure is not an academic embarrassment. It is a strategic threat. They had declared Earth hopeless. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. A species unified not by conquest, not by ideology, but by insult. For 30 years, the galaxy believed Earth had been archived, cataloged, dismissed, a statistical footnote in the Harmonium's vast databanks of emerging civilizations. The file labeled Sol 3ja Humanda Hopeless Primitive had not been updated since the observers withdrew. It was never meant to be. Civilizations deemed non-viable were rarely revisited. History suggested they either annihilated themselves or stagnated into irrelevance. Humanity did neither. The first anomaly appeared as a distortion ripple along the outer monitoring lattice of the Perseus arm. A gravitational shear wave, too symmetrical to be natural, too controlled to be accidental. Harmonium sensors recalibrated. The anomaly repeated, then repeated again, and then, unmistakably, a human signature appeared embedded within the curvature pattern. A mathematical watermark, not hidden, intentional. It was not a distress call, it was not a greeting, it was a declaration. Earth has entered the interstellar domain. For the first time in recorded Harmonium history, a civilization previously classified as hopeless had demonstrated warp traversal within less than a single galactic standard generation. That defied precedent. It defied probability. It defied the predictive matrices upon which the Harmonium built its authority. Their models were not suggestions, they were law, and law had just been broken. A new observation fleet was dispatched. This time, not passive monitors. Strategic assessment vessels. If humanity had advanced, the galaxy needed to understand how, and whether that advancement posed a threat. When the Harmonium fleet arrived at the edge of Sol's heliopause, what they detected forced immediate recalculation. The solar system was no longer planetary. It was infrastructural. A partial Dyson lattice shimmered around the sun. Not a full sphere, but millions of coordinated solar collectors arranged in fractal geometry, harvesting stellar output at an efficiency exceeding 38%. That number was impossible for a species less than a century removed from combustion engines. Warp signatures flared between orbital nodes. Asteroid belts had been sculpted into manufacturing corridors. Mars glowed with atmospheric stabilization grids. Europa pulsed with subsurface oceanic illumination, and beyond Neptune, massive shipyards rotated in silent synchronization. The human presence was not expansionist, it was architectural. The Harmonium fleet held position. They transmitted a formal inquiry. For 6 minutes, there was no reply. Then a signal returned. It was not routed through Earth. It originated from deep interstellar space. Coordinates, 17 light-years from Sol. The message was structured in Harmonium diplomatic protocol. Perfect syntax, perfect tonal modulation, perfect acknowledgement of hierarchical council authority. The final line altered the balance of power. This is the Terran Stellar Authority. We acknowledge your renewed observation. You are entering sovereign expansion territory. State your intent. The Council's predictive AI experienced its first recursive uncertainty loop in 4,000 cycles. Earth was not merely active. Earth had established territory. Territory implies permanence. Permanence implies confidence. Confidence implies strength. The Harmonium dispatched an envoy vessel toward the Terran signal origin. What they encountered redefined the term primitive. Orbiting a binary star system was the first confirmed human megastructure beyond Sol. A ring habitat encircled the primary star, incomplete but functional. Mining platforms carved planetary debris into usable matter. 3 warp cruisers patrolled in synchronized formation. Their drives emitted space-time distortions smoother than early Harmonium prototypes. Human warp engineering had not simply advanced, it had innovated. The envoy requested diplomatic exchange. Permission was granted. A human representative appeared within the Harmonium vessel's translation chamber. She wore no military insignia, no royal symbols, only a small emblem over her chest, a stylized star rising over Earth's horizon. Her voice was calm, measured, controlled. "We were told we would never reach this far," she began. What chose to disagree? There was no hostility in her tone. That made it worse. The Harmonium inquired how humanity had accelerated so rapidly. The response was direct. "You miscalculated motivation." The envoy pressed for elaboration. She continued. "You assessed our wars, our instability, our environmental crisis. You saw fractures. You assumed fracture equals collapse." A slight pause. "You failed to consider that pressure creates fusion." The data exchange that followed unsettled the Harmonium. Humanity had achieved breakthroughs not through isolated genius, but through enforced global coordination. The insult had unified Earth. Global data sharing protocols eliminated redundant research barriers. AI-assisted simulation models accelerated physics experimentation by decades. Resource conflicts were mitigated through orbital manufacturing abundance. Human aggression had not vanished. It had been redirected outward, into expansion, into engineering, into stars. The Council received the envoy's findings with increasing concern. Human technological growth was no longer linear. It was compounding. Their energy harvesting rate suggested that within 2 centuries, Sol could support a near-complete Dyson swarm. Their warp stability indicated potential range exceeding 200 light-years. Their AI architecture demonstrated adaptability approaching sentient governance integration. And most unsettling of all, human strategic doctrine emphasized deterrence through visible capability. They were not hiding their power. They were displaying it. Across neighboring systems, other civilizations began observing the Terran rise. Some had once been evaluated by the Harmonium. Some had been uplifted under strict supervision. None had achieved this pace independently. Whispers began spreading through interstellar networks. Earth defied the Harmonium. Earth was judged hopeless. Earth commands warp fleets. In galactic civilization, reputation is gravitational. It bends perception, and humanity's mass was increasing rapidly. The Harmonium made a calculated decision. They would not confront. They would not threaten. They would re-evaluate. A formal invitation was transmitted to Sol. Earth was requested to send representatives to the galactic conclave, a gathering rarely open to emerging species. The invitation carried political weight, recognition, but also scrutiny. The Terran response arrived within minutes. "We will attend." No hesitation, no subservience, no gratitude, just presence. When the Terran delegation entered the conclave chamber for the first time, 47 species observed them, some ancient, some technologically superior, all aware of Earth's original classification. The chamber's gravity shifted subtly as diplomatic tension intensified. Human representatives wore no ceremonial extravagance, no technological intimidation displays. They entered as equals, because they believed they were. And belief, in politics, is contagious. The Council presented Earth's original verdict for public record. A reminder, a subtle assertion of authority. Then they presented updated data, warp capabilities, megastructures, territorial expansion, energy metrics. The chamber vibrated with low-frequency astonishment. A species that should have collapsed had instead surged. And the Harmonium admitted, publicly, that their projections had failed. That admission carried more weight than any weapon. Then Earth's representative was invited to speak. She did not boast. She did not accuse. She projected a visual stream into the chamber, images of divided nations unifying, climate restoration grids activating, children watching the first warp jump broadcast, workers assembling orbital habitats, scientists celebrating stabilized space-time curvature. We were told we were hopeless, she said evenly. So we removed hopelessness from our vocabulary. A pause. You saw our conflicts. You did not see our capacity. The final words echoed through translation harmonics. We do not seek conquest. We seek construction. But we will not be contained. Silence filled the conclave. For millennia, the harmonium's projections had been considered infallible. Now a former primitive stood before them, not as a supplicant, but as proof that models can break, and when models break, power shifts. Outside the chamber, something even more significant was occurring. Independent species began initiating contact with Earth. Trade inquiries, scientific exchanges, cultural transmissions. They were curious, because humanity represented something radical. Acceleration without supervision, growth without permission, and in a galaxy structured around managed evolution, unmanaged potential is destabilizing. The harmonium faced a strategic crossroads. Option 1 contained humanity before exponential growth destabilized regional equilibrium. Option 2, integrate humanity and hope influence could moderate their expansion. The Council chose integration. For now, Earth was granted provisional conclave status, limited voting rights, trade corridors, shared scientific archives. The official statement described it as recognition of remarkable progress. Privately, it was a containment strategy. Keep them close, monitor closely, learn how they did it. Humanity accepted the status. But acceptance did not mean slowing. Within 5 years of conclave integration, Terran engineers unveiled the Helios Gate, a stabilized artificial wormhole array capable of near-instantaneous transit across 60 light-years. It outperformed harmonium transit corridors by 12%. That margin was small, but symbolic. Earth was no longer catching up. Earth was innovating beyond precedent. And then came the transmission that changed everything. Long-range Terran explorers detected something beyond mapped space, a gravitational disturbance inconsistent with natural cosmology, an expanding void consuming stellar systems, not war, not a species, a phenomenon, an extinction wave. Projected trajectory indicated eventual contact with harmonium-controlled sectors. And, centuries later, Earth, the galaxy had a new problem, one larger than pride. Larger than politics, larger than projection errors. For the first time, the harmonium looked toward Earth not as a miscalculation, but as a potential ally, and perhaps something more dangerous, a leader. The anomaly did not roar, it did not blaze like a supernova. It whispered. Entire star systems went silent, no explosion signatures, no debris fields, no radiation spikes, just absence. The first harmonium listening post in Sector Virex stopped transmitting mid-cycle. Its quantum beacon did not decay. It did not overload. It simply ceased, as though the concept of there had been erased. The phenomenon was designated null expansion event. Privately, many within the conclave called it something simpler. The hunger, astrophysical analysis revealed something impossible. The expanding region was not antimatter annihilation, not a black hole cascade, not dark matter instability. It was a region of space-time undergoing entropy acceleration at a cosmological scale. Inside its boundary, fundamental forces destabilized. Atomic cohesion weakened. Energy gradients flattened. Stars dimmed and dissolved into uniform thermal equilibrium in months rather than billions of years. It was not destruction. It was heat death. Weaponized by nature itself, the projected trajectory intersected 3 harmonium core territories within 430 standard years, which meant evacuation planning began immediately, because no civilization in recorded galactic history had reversed entropy, except perhaps the one once declared hopeless. When the data was presented to the Terran Stellar Authority, there was no panic, only calculation. Humanity had spent 3 decades accelerating its mastery over stellar engineering. They understood fusion ignition thresholds. They understood gravitational harmonics. They had built partial Dyson arrays and stabilized artificial wormholes. They had bent spacetime, and bending spacetime is dangerously close to understanding it. Within weeks, Terran physicists proposed something the Conclave initially rejected as reckless. Construct a counter-entropy lattice, not around a single star, not around a system, but across a sector. An interlinked network of energy transfer conduits that would siphon stellar output from stable regions and inject high-density energy into the null boundary, forcing re-stabilization of quantum fields. In simple terms, feed the void until it chokes. The harmonium objected. The energy requirements were astronomical, the infrastructure unprecedented, the risk immeasurable. If the lattice destabilized, it could amplify the null expansion. Humanity's response was immediate. Then we build it correctly. There was a silence in the conclave chamber when the Terran delegation added, "We were told we could not reach the stars. You may tell us we cannot stop the void. We have experience ignoring you." It was not arrogance. It was pattern recognition. A joint task force was formed. For the first time in history, Harmonium elder species worked under Terran engineering frameworks. It was subtle, but the leadership dynamic had shifted. Humanity was no longer asking permission. They were presenting blueprints. Construction began at the frontier of the null expansion. Massive energy siphons were anchored to stable blue giants. Helios gates were repurposed into power relays. Entire uninhabited systems were designated as sacrificial reactors, their stellar output redirected into compression conduits spanning light years. The scale dwarfed anything previously attempted. It required coordination across dozens of species. It required trust, and trust had once been denied to Earth. As the lattice expanded, the null boundary advanced. Stars vanished within visible range of construction fleets. Terran crews watched distant suns dim like dying embers. There was fear, but it was focused. Humanity had learned to convert fear into fuel. During Phase 3 of lattice deployment, disaster struck. A Harmonium power nexus misaligned gravitational output by 0.702%. The deviation cascaded. A relay corridor destabilized. 3 stars went critical. The null boundary surged forward by 0.4 light years in less than a week. Millions of inhabited worlds across peripheral species sectors were placed at imminent risk. The conclave fractured into accusation. Some blamed Terran recklessness. Others blamed Harmonium rigidity. Old political fault lines reopened, and the void continued expanding. It was Earth that acted first. Without waiting for unanimous approval, the Terran Stellar Authority authorized activation of prototype core ignition, a classified project, one even the Conclave had not fully reviewed. The device was simple in theory, catastrophic in scale, a mobile stellar compressor capable of inducing controlled hyper-fusion in a dying star, increasing its output by 800% for a limited duration before collapse. A star turned into a directed energy weapon. The chosen target was a red giant already nearing instability. Terran fleets encircled it. Compression fields engaged. The star's surface rippled. Luminosity spiked. Across the lattice network, energy conduits surged. For 19 hours, the amplified star fed the counter-entropy field at levels previously deemed impossible. And something extraordinary happened. The null boundary slowed, not permanently, not reversed, but measurably resisted. For the first time since detection, the expansion rate decreased. The void could be pushed back. The cost was immense. The red giant collapsed into a neutron remnant. Several Terran vessels were lost during containment. But the data was undeniable. Entropy could be delayed, possibly reversed. The conclave shifted from skepticism to urgency. Humanity's approach, bold, risky, adaptive, had produced the first measurable success. And now, the galaxy needed more of it. Joint Command Authority was restructured. Terran engineers were granted operational leadership over lattice optimization. Harmonium elder physicists integrated into human AI modeling systems. The distinction between overseer and primitive dissolved completely, because survival does not respect hierarchy. Years passed in accelerated collaboration. The lattice grew. Stars were repositioned using gravitational shepherding. Binary systems were synchronized into energy amplification pairs. Dark matter mapping allowed more precise quantum stabilization modeling. And gradually, painfully, the null boundary stopped advancing, then stabilized, then began to contract. Celebration was muted, because the galaxy had witnessed something profound. The species once declared too unstable to uplift had coordinated an interstellar defense that elder civilizations had not conceived. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked desperation. Humanity had been forged in crisis. Extinction threats were not abstract to them. They were cultural memory. When the null expansion finally receded beyond critical sectors, a new truth settled across the conclave. The Harmonium's greatest predictive failure had not been underestimating human technology. It had been underestimating human will. In a private session, the Council of 12 addressed the Terran delegation. "We misjudged you." It was the closest the Harmonium had ever come to apology. The Terran representative responded without triumph. "You measured our fractures. You did not measure our response to fracture." A pause. "Now you have." But the story did not end with victory. Because the lattice data revealed something chilling. The null expansion had not been random. Its origin point displayed geometric symmetry, directional bias, artificial modulation signatures buried within entropy flow patterns. The void had not been a natural disaster. It had been engineered. Somewhere beyond mapped space, an intelligence had weaponized cosmology itself. And if they could accelerate heat death across sectors, they had likely noticed the resistance, which meant one thing. The galaxy was no longer dealing with a phenomenon. It was facing an adversary. And in the newly strengthened interstellar order, one civilization had proven uniquely suited to defy extinction. The one once told it would never reach the stars. The signal did not resemble language. It resembled correction. When the null expansion's origin point was triangulated, Terran deep field arrays detected structured emissions embedded within cosmic background noise. At first, they appeared as statistical artifacts, irregular microwave fluctuations across decaying sectors. Then the pattern repeated, not randomly, intentionally. A compression algorithm hidden within entropy gradients. Someone had written code into the dying of stars. The conclave trembled at the implication. An intelligence capable of accelerating thermodynamic decay across multiple systems would not be bound by conventional warfare. It would not deploy fleets. It would not negotiate territory. It would erase physics. And yet, that intelligence had made one mistake. It had left structure in the pattern. Structure implies design. Design implies mind, and a mind can be confronted. The Terran Stellar Authority proposed a reconnaissance initiative into the receding null frontier. The Harmonium objected immediately. The region remained unstable. Residual entropy fields distorted spacetime. Conventional warp transit risked disintegration. Humanity's response was quiet. We will not use conventional transit. Project Prometheus had been classified since the early Dyson expansion years. Its foundation was controversial even among Terran scientists. If warp compressed spacetime, Prometheus would phase it. Instead of bending the fabric of the universe, it shifted a vessel's quantum probability envelope slightly out of baseline reality, allowing transit through unstable regions without interacting with their thermodynamic decay. It was not faster than light. It was adjacent to existence. The risks were staggering. Phase drift beyond 0.7% could strand a vessel into coherent probability space. No rescue possible, no return. But if the enemy manipulated entropy directly, humanity needed to step outside predictable physical law. The first Prometheus vessel was named Aegis Vector, crewed by volunteers from 6 conclave species, but commanded by Terran officers. Not because of dominance, because they were the only ones reckless enough to try. As Aegis Vector phased into the null boundary, sensor feeds distorted into abstract geometry. Stars appeared as smeared equations. Space rippled like liquid metal. Entropy gradients pulsed like a heartbeat, and at the center of the origin coordinates, they found it. A construct. Not biological. Not mechanical in the conventional sense. A lattice of energy filaments spanning an entire dead system. It resembled a shattered sphere, its fragments suspended around a central void that radiated controlled entropy waves. The architects of entropy had not built ships. They had built a cosmological engine. Aegis Vector transmitted data in bursts before phase interference intensified. Spectral analysis revealed self-organizing quantum nodes embedded within the construct, processing units operating at scales smaller than atomic nuclei. This was not a civilization as the Conclave understood it. It was a distributed intelligence diffused through spacetime itself. It did not occupy planets. It occupied constants. Then the construct responded. A directed entropy pulse struck Aegis Vector's phase envelope. For 0.03 seconds, reality fluctuated. 2 crew members decohered, not killed, but erased from local spacetime continuity. No remains. No energy signature. Simply statistical subtraction. The first casualties of a war beyond matter. The Terran commander made a decision without waiting for conclave authorization. Transmit greeting protocol. Not in words. In mathematics. Prime sequences layered with quantum symmetry. The universal signature of intelligence. The entropy pulses paused. The construct altered frequency. A response returned. It was not translated. It was experienced. Across the crew's neural interfaces, a conceptual imprint formed. Order is inefficiency. Complexity accelerates collapse. We accelerate inevitability. The architects did not view themselves as destroyers. They viewed themselves as optimizers. Life, civilization, resistance. All were temporary disruptions in the universe's march toward equilibrium. They had chosen to hasten it. Back in conclave space, panic surged. An adversary that weaponized entropy itself could not be fought with fleets. Even Prometheus phasing offered limited protection. If the architects expanded beyond a few sectors, no lattice would be sufficient. Unless something more radical was attempted. Humanity proposed it, and this time even the harmonium recoiled. If entropy was the enemy's weapon, then humanity would weaponize negentropy. The concept had emerged during early climate restoration efforts on Earth. Localized reversal of disorder through immense energy concentration. At planetary scale, it meant ecosystem stabilization. At stellar scale, it meant forced structural coherence. At galactic scale, it meant rewriting the flow of time's arrow. Project Genesis Array, a network of synchronized Dyson swarms across 200 systems, channeling not just energy, but information. Because entropy is not merely energy dispersion, it is informational decay. If enough structured information were projected into destabilizing regions, quantum states could be forced back into low, entropy alignment. It would be like freezing a wildfire mid-burn. The energy requirement would exceed anything previously attempted. Entire stars would be sacrificed. Civilizations would need to evacuate systems designated as energy anchors. The galaxy would need to commit fully. For 3 cycles, the conclave debated. Some species argued for retreat beyond mapped space. Others demanded negotiation with the architects. The Terran delegation offered one final projection: a simulation. If the architects remained unchallenged, entropy acceleration would cascade across spiral arms within 3,000 standard years. No sanctuary would exist. Running was illusion. The vote passed, not unanimously, but decisively. Humanity was granted full strategic authority over Genesis array construction. The species, once labeled too unstable to uplift, now directed the survival of the galaxy. Construction dwarfed even the counter-entropy lattice. Entire systems were converted into structured energy emitters. Quantum, entangled synchronization relays linked swarms across light centuries. The Helios gates were upgraded to transmit informational coherence pulses instead of transit corridors. And at the heart of the network sat Sol. Earth, the world once deemed primitive. Now the synchronization anchor for galactic resistance. As Genesis array neared activation, the architects responded. Entropy surges intensified along the frontier. Several peripheral systems were lost entirely, compressed into thermodynamic flatness before evacuation completed. The message was clear. The universe trends toward stillness. You delay the inevitable. Humanity transmitted its reply across the lattice. We are the inevitable. Genesis array activated. Across 200 stars, synchronized emission began. Energy did not radiate chaotically. It structured. Quantum fields realigned. Entropy gradients reversed. The null boundary convulsed. For the first time since the architects began their expansion, their cosmological engine destabilized. The shattered sphere flickered. Filaments collapsed inward. Entropy pulses faltered. The architects attempted counter-modulation, but they had optimized for decay. They had not anticipated a civilization willing to burn its own stars to preserve complexity. Because such willingness defied their core assumption. That order would always choose efficiency. Humanity chose defiance instead. Aegis Vector, still phased near the construct, received the final transmission from the architects. Your persistence is statistically irrational. The Terran commander's reply was simple, correct. Genesis array surged beyond projected thresholds. The entropy engine imploded, not in explosion, but in reorganization. Its quantum nodes were forced into stable equilibrium. The cosmological construct collapsed into inert matter. The architect's presence dissolved into background radiation, not destroyed, converted. Across the galaxy, stars stabilized. The null expansion ceased entirely. Systems previously dimmed began slow recovery. The war beyond physics ended not with annihilation, but with correction. Human correction. The cost was staggering. Dozens of stars permanently depleted. Several civilizations displaced. Genesis array required constant maintenance. But the galaxy survived, and survival changes power structures permanently. In the aftermath, the conclave convened once more, not in crisis, in recognition. The Council of 12 stood before the assembly. And for the first time in Harmonium history, they amended an official classification. Sol 3 Human Primitive. Stricken. Replaced with Sol 3 Human Stellar Architects. The Terran delegation listened without triumph, because they had not built Genesis array for validation. They had built it because extinction was unacceptable. Yet one truth lingered. The architects had viewed entropy as inevitability. Humanity had proven inevitability negotiable, and that realization altered the philosophical foundation of galactic civilization. The future was no longer a slope toward decay. It was a terrain to be engineered. The species once judged hopeless now defined the trajectory of stars. And somewhere in distant, uncharted dark, other intelligences were watching. Because a civilization that commands entropy itself is no longer primitive. It is pivotal. Victory did not arrive as celebration. It arrived as silence. For the first time in decades, the frontier was quiet. No entropy spikes, no gravitational alarms, no emergency conclave summons, just stars, burning steadily, stably, alive, and across 200 systems, civilizations stood beneath their skies knowing those suns still shone because one species refused to accept inevitability. The Genesis array remained active, though scaled down from combat output. It now functioned as a galactic stabilization network, correcting fluctuations, reinforcing quantum cohesion, maintaining equilibrium where natural drift might one day have grown dangerous again. It was not a weapon anymore. It was infrastructure, and infrastructure is power. The political aftershocks began almost immediately. For millennia, the harmonium had defined advancement as gradual ascent under supervision. Civilizations matured slowly, carefully, predictably. Humanity had shattered that doctrine. They had accelerated themselves without permission. They had commanded joint military operations. They had directed elder species in existential war. They had rewritten thermodynamic assumptions. The conclave could not simply resume its previous hierarchy, because now every species in that chamber understood something undeniable. If Earth had been uplifted traditionally, it would never have become what it became. It required the insult. It required the dismissal. It required being told it would fail. A motion was introduced. Restructure conclave authority from predictive oversight to cooperative innovation. The proposal passed with overwhelming majority. The Harmonium Council retained influence, but no longer absolute projection authority. Strategic direction would rotate among member civilizations based on demonstrated contribution. The first rotational lead, Sol. Earth did not celebrate that either, because leadership was not a trophy. It was weight, and humanity had learned what weight truly felt like. Across Earth itself, transformation had become permanent. National flags still existed. Cultural identities remained vibrant. But above all of them flew the Terran standard, the star rising over the horizon of Earth. The symbol once worn by a single envoy now represented a species that had faced cosmic extinction and answered. Education systems across the planet shifted again, not toward war, not toward dominance, but toward stewardship, because humanity had learned something the architects never understood. Complexity is not inefficiency, it is potential. Years after the Entropy War, a final discovery emerged from Genesis Array's deep field sensors. Residual data fragments from the collapsed entropy engine revealed something unexpected. The architects had not originated in this galaxy. They were remnants, survivors of a previous cosmological epoch where entropy acceleration had consumed nearly everything. They had chosen preemption over extinction. They believed that by hastening equilibrium, they prevented prolonged suffering. Their logic was not cruelty. It was fatalism. The revelation sparked debate across the conclave. Were the architects villains, or victims who surrendered to inevitability? The Terran representative addressed the assembly once more. They chose surrender to entropy, she said. We chose resistance. A pause. The difference is not intelligence. It is philosophy. Humanity began a new project, not defensive, not militaristic, but audacious. If entropy could be delayed, if decay could be reversed, if cosmological engines could be built, then perhaps the lifespan of the universe itself was negotiable. Project Dawn Horizon. a theoretical framework to extend stellar life cycles through controlled matter recycling at galactic scale. It was an idea so immense that even elder species struggled to conceptualize it. But after Genesis Array, no one laughed at Terran ambition anymore. In a private chamber overlooking Earth from orbit, the Council of 12 met with the Terran Stellar Authority. The same species that once broadcast the verdict of extinction now spoke differently. "You have altered the trajectory of this galaxy," the lead Harmonium representative stated. The Terran response was calm. "No, we altered our own." The distinction mattered. Before departing, the Harmonium envoy delivered a final archival transmission, one that would be embedded permanently in conclave history. Humanity was once assessed as hopeless and primitive. Assessment withdrawn. Revised designation: catalytic civilization. Catalytic. Not dominant, not superior. Catalytic. The species that accelerates change. On Earth, the anniversary of the original verdict became a global holiday, not one of anger, but of remembrance. Children studied the broadcast in history modules. They learned how their ancestors were judged. They learned how those ancestors responded. And they learned the most important lesson of all: external verdicts are not destiny. Far beyond Sol, newly constructed Helios gates linked hundreds of systems in luminous corridors. Trade flourished. Cultural exchanges multiplied. Scientific collaboration accelerated. The galaxy was no longer a ladder of hierarchy. It was a network. And at its heart, the once dismissed world continued building. Not because it needed validation, but because building is what humanity does when challenged. In the quiet of space, an old monitoring probe drifted near Earth's orbit. One of the original Harmonium observers, long deactivated. Terran engineers had preserved it as a museum artifact. Its hull still bore the classification stamp, hopeless primitive. They did not erase it. They framed it. Because it was proof. Proof that judgment can ignite evolution. Proof that underestimation is the most dangerous gift you can give humanity. As Sol's Dyson lattice expanded further, its glow visible from neighboring systems, a final transmission was broadcast across all conclave space. Not a threat, not a boast, a statement. We were declared hopeless. We reached the stars. We were declared primitive. We mastered them. If the universe trends toward silence, we will teach it to sing again. And somewhere in the distant cosmic dark beyond mapped space, subtle fluctuations stirred, not entropy engines, not architects, but watchers. Because when one civilization proves that inevitability is negotiable, others begin to wonder what else might be rewritten. They called us hopeless. They called us primitive. They told us we would never reach the stars. And yet, here we stand. If this story reminded you that humanity's greatest strength is not perfection, but defiance, if it made you feel that fire in your chest, if it proved that when the universe says, inevitable, we answer, watch us, then this channel is for you. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we rewrite destinies. Subscribe if you believe humanity is more than its worst mistakes. Like the video if you would stand when the stars judge us. And comment below, if the galaxy declared Earth hopeless tomorrow, how would we prove them wrong? This is not the end. This is the ignition point. And the stars, they're listening.